It all started with one harsh remark, a simple, biting comment from a flight attendant that would spiral into something no one could have foreseen. In just 3 short minutes, what seemed like a passing insult turned into a pivotal moment that would change everything. But what exactly unfolded in those intense seconds? And why did it lead to a shocking decision that would leave everyone on board in complete disbelief? You won't believe how quickly this story transforms. And trust us, you don't want to miss the unexpected twist ahead. Before we dive into this roller coaster of emotions, hit that subscribe button so you're the first to hear about our most gripping stories. The plane had only just lifted off, the cabin filled with the low hum of engines and the gentle sway of the sky. Adam and Bella, both in their early 30s, had been eagerly awaiting this trip for months, meticulously planning their perfect getaway. As the clouds parted and sunlight streamed through the windows, their excitement was palpable. They settled into their seats, chatting animatedly about the destinations that awaited them, their hearts light with anticipation. What they didn't know was that in just a few minutes, everything would change. As the flight attendants made their rounds, ensuring everyone was comfortable and that seat belts were securely fastened, Adam gazed out the window, his face bathed in golden light, while Bella, lost in the pages of a magazine, remained oblivious to the world around them. Their focus was on the future, on the adventure ahead, unaware that a moment of tension was brewing right behind them. Chloe, the flight attendant, approached them with a smile that seemed just a little too forced, too tight, as she checked in on the other passengers. At first, Adam didn't notice, but Bella, ever observant, felt a chill in the air. It wasn't until Chloe passed them for the second time that things took a sharp, unsettling turn. Adam had merely adjusted his seat, seeking comfort for the long flight ahead. But before he could ask for a drink, Chloe's gaze turned cold, her voice icy and dismissive. "You need to sit back and stay in your seat properly," she said, her words cutting through the air like a blade. Adam, confused and caught off guard, looked at her, his mind racing. He had done nothing wrong. Bella, sensing the rising tension, looked up, her voice calm but firm. "We're fine, just adjusting," she said. But Chloe, without another word, turned and walked away, huffing under her breath. They exchanged bewildered glances, unsure of what had just happened. Maybe she was just having a rough day, they thought. But then Chloe reached the end of the aisle and stopped once more. The words that followed would shake them to their core. "You people never seem to follow the rules, do you?" Chloe spat, her voice sharp enough to pierce the growing silence. The venom in her words hung in the air, thick with disdain. The cabin, once a serene bubble, now buzzed with tension. Adam's jaw tightened, a cold wave of disbelief crashing over him. Bella sat frozen, her mind whirling as she tried to process the audacity of the insult. It was as though time itself had frozen, their excitement replaced by an overwhelming silence. Their world, once light and hopeful, had shifted into something dark and uncomfortable. For a moment they were both stunned. How had things escalated so quickly? A peaceful flight, a long-awaited vacation, had turned into something far darker in the blink of an eye. Adam and Bella couldn't believe what had just transpired. They had boarded the plane excited, ready to enjoy their time together, only for the experience to take a sudden and unsettling turn. The sting of Chloe's words hung in the air, but it was just the beginning of a much larger confrontation. Bella's heart pounded in her chest, the shock beginning to give way to anger. It wasn't just the words Chloe had spoken. It was the tone, the venom laced in her voice. It was the assumption that, as a black couple, they didn't belong in the same space as everyone else. Bella had faced her fair share of discrimination before, but this felt different. This wasn't a casual remark from a stranger or a misplaced comment from a coworker. It came from someone in power, someone who was supposed to make them feel safe and welcome. Adam, too, was grappling with what had just happened. He wanted to confront Chloe, to demand an apology right then and there, but a wave of doubt washed over him. What if it made things worse? What if, in standing up for themselves, they were escorted off the plane? He looked around, hoping that someone else would intervene, but the passengers, too stunned and uncomfortable, kept their eyes on their laps. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Bella, her hands trembling, looked down at her lap, trying to steady her breath. Adam turned his gaze back to the window, his fists clenched at his sides. Neither of them knew what the next step should be, but they both knew that they couldn't just let it slide. Finally, it was Bella who broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with determination. "We need to talk to someone. This isn't right." Her words, though shaky, rang with the certainty of someone who had had enough. Adam nodded, his jaw set, the weight of Chloe's words still pressing down on him. They didn't wait long to act. Moments later, they caught the attention of Deanna, another flight attendant, who had noticed the change in atmosphere. She approached them cautiously, sensing that something was amiss. "Excuse me," Adam said, his voice steady but firm. "We need to speak with someone in charge. There's been an issue with your colleague." Diana's eyes widened in surprise. She had overheard part of the exchange, but it was clear from the look on her face that she understood the gravity of the situation. "Of course," she said, her voice softening. "Let me get the manager for you." As Diana walked off to fetch the supervisor, Adam and Bella exchanged a glance. The dynamic of the flight had shifted so drastically in such a short span of time. What was supposed to be a relaxing getaway had turned into something far more complicated. An uncomfortable reality they were now facing head-on. Racism could rear its ugly head anywhere, even in places that were supposed to be safe. It wasn't long before Ethan, the supervisor, appeared at their seats. His expression was serious, his professional tone signaling that he was ready to handle the situation. "I understand there's been an issue," he said. Bella took a deep breath, trying to hold back the rush of emotion that threatened to spill over. "Your colleague just insulted us," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "She told us we don't follow the rules." And then she paused, her throat tight, and then she called us out in front of everyone. She said, "You people never follow the rules." Ethan listened carefully, his face unreadable. Adam and Bella could tell he was processing the situation, but they didn't know what to expect next. Would he defend his colleague, or would he take their side? "You're absolutely right to be upset," Ethan said after a long pause. "I'm going to handle this immediately." The calmness of his words gave them a sense of relief, but they didn't know what would happen next. Would Chloe face consequences? Would she even be sorry? Bella and Adam tried not to think about it too much for now. All they could do was wait. But within moments, the atmosphere on the plane shifted once again. Ethan's calm, measured approach seemed to have set something in motion. The passengers, who had been quietly watching the situation unfold, were beginning to whisper among themselves, murmuring under their breath. What had just happened wasn't just another customer complaint. It was a moment of truth. It was clear now that something had to change, but how far would the airline go to make things right? The tension in the cabin was palpable as Ethan walked away, leaving Adam and Bella to sit in uneasy silence. A few passengers cast curious glances their way, and whispers started to ripple through the rows. And the once peaceful hum of the flight now seemed to buzz with discomfort. Adam and Bella exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what was about to unfold. They had done what they could. They had spoken up, and now it was out of their hands. Ethan returned a few minutes later, his face serious but resolute. "I've spoken with Chloe," he said. "She's been removed from her duties for the remainder of the flight, and we'll be addressing this issue with our team. We take this kind of behavior very seriously." He paused, watching them carefully, as if gauging their reaction. Adam and Bella looked at each other, their frustration still lingering, but now mixed with a sense of cautious relief. They weren't sure if this was enough. After all, removing Chloe from her duties felt like a temporary fix. What about the larger issue? What would come of this situation when the flight landed? "We appreciate you taking action," Bella said, her voice calm but firm. "But this isn't just about one bad interaction. It's about how we're treated when we're in spaces like this. We shouldn't have to endure racism, no matter where we are." She didn't want to let the moment pass without making her point clear. Adam nodded in agreement, silently supporting her words. Ethan didn't argue. "I completely understand," he said, his tone shifting to one of genuine empathy. "I assure you, we're going to make sure this is dealt with properly. This kind of behavior is not tolerated in our airline, and I'm personally going to ensure that Chloe is held accountable." There was something reassuring about his words, but it wasn't enough to erase the sting of the insult. Bella's hands still trembled slightly as she looked out the window. The plane was cruising at a comfortable altitude now, but the atmosphere inside felt strangely unsettled. Adam, however, was less optimistic. What happens now? Does she just get to go back to her job after the flight? Ethan hesitated for a moment. "We'll be conducting a full investigation into this incident when we land. We take these matters seriously, and I'll make sure the right decisions are made." The promise of an investigation sounded good, but Adam and Bella had learned to be wary of promises that weren't followed through. Would they just forget about this once they were back on the ground? Would the airline protect one of their own, or would they stand by their commitment to take action? As the minutes ticked by, the couple couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. They knew that as soon as they landed, they'd be left with more questions than answers. But at that moment, all they could do was wait. They had done their part by speaking up. The rest was out of their hands. Meanwhile, other passengers who had overheard the exchange began to voice their support for Adam and Bella. One by one, they quietly approached Ethan and shared their concerns. "That was completely uncalled for," one woman said. "I'm glad you're handling it, but she shouldn't be working here anymore." Another man, a frequent flyer, added, "I've seen flight attendants get reprimanded for much less. If she's going to treat people like that, she doesn't belong here." Ethan nodded thoughtfully, absorbing their words. It was clear that the passengers weren't just supporting the couple. They were voicing their own discomfort with what had happened. The atmosphere on the plane had shifted from tense to something else entirely. Something more unified, as if the entire cabin had become an unexpected community, bound together by shared outrage. Back at Adam and Bella's seats, the couple sat in quiet contemplation, the reality of what had just happened settling in. They had hoped for a relaxing flight, a peaceful beginning to their much-anticipated vacation. Instead, they had been thrust into an uncomfortable confrontation with a system that often failed to protect them. Despite the frustration, they both knew one thing for certain. They had taken a stand, and no matter what happened next, they were determined to make sure their voices had been heard. As the flight continued, the initial shock of the incident slowly began to wear off, but the questions remained. Adam and Bella sat quietly, each lost in their thoughts. The initial anger had subsided, but it had been replaced with a lingering unease. They both knew this was far from over, and while Ethan had promised an investigation, there was still the unsettling feeling that nothing might change. Adam finally broke the silence. "Do you think they'll actually do something about it?" he asked, his voice low, almost as if he was speaking more to himself than to Bella. He glanced out the window again, his face reflected in the glass. "I mean, I don't know how many times we've had to deal with stuff like this. People say they'll take action, but then nothing happens." He let out a frustrated sigh. Bella nodded slowly, but her expression was more resolute than Adam's. "We can't just sit back and assume nothing will change. We spoke up, Adam. We have to believe that if we don't hold people accountable, nothing ever will, she said, her voice steady and filled with quiet strength. She wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. Not this time. Never. Adam turned to her, his eyes softening. I know you're right. It's just, sometimes it feels like we're the only ones who care, you know? Like we're the ones who have to fight for basic decency. He paused, thinking for a moment. Maybe this time will be different. Maybe they'll actually follow through. There was a moment of silence between them before Bella spoke again. We won't let them forget. We need to follow up when we land. If they think they can just sweep this under the rug, they're wrong. Her words were firm, filled with the kind of determination Adam admired in her. She wasn't going to let the airline brush the incident aside like so many others before it. They both looked up as the captain's voice came over the intercom, signaling that they were beginning their descent. The final leg of the flight had arrived. Bella tightened her grip on Adam's hand, as if to steady herself. There was no turning back now. No pretending this hadn't happened. As the plane made its descent, the air inside felt charged with anticipation. Bella and Adam exchanged another glance, both wondering what would happen once they landed. Would Chloe be waiting for them at the gate? Would she apologize, or would the airline just try to move on from the whole thing? Soon, the plane touched down with a soft jolt, and the fastened seatbelt sign blinked off. The usual post-landing chaos began, with passengers unbuckling their seatbelts, pulling their carry-ons from the overhead compartments, and talking about the next steps in their travels. For most, it was just another flight in a routine journey. But for Adam and Bella, it was anything but ordinary. They knew the moment they stepped off the plane, they would be thrust back into the world where their voices mattered, or in some cases, where they often went unheard. As the cabin doors opened and the passengers began to file out, Bella stood up, her shoulders squared. Adam followed suit, still unsure of what to expect, but with a newfound sense of resolve. They weren't about to let the moment slip away. This was their chance to ensure that the airline would be forced to deal with the incident at the gate. A group of airport staff was waiting, and there, standing at the front, was Chloe. She looked different now, no longer in her flight attendant uniform. The arrogance that had been so apparent earlier was gone, replaced by an air of uncertainty. She avoided making eye contact with Adam and Bella, but her presence alone was enough to spark something in both of them. Ethan, the supervisor, was there too, standing next to Chloe. His posture was rigid, and he looked at the couple with a mixture of empathy and professionalism. "We need to speak with you both in private," he said. "Please, follow me to the office." The walk to the office felt surreal, like they were entering another world altogether. But this time they weren't walking in fear. They were walking with purpose. This time they knew they had the power to hold someone accountable for their actions. What would happen next? They didn't know, but one thing was clear. They weren't going to back down. Not this time. They had fought for themselves, and now they were determined to make sure that their voices, and the voices of others who had suffered in silence, were heard. The small office was stark, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. Ethan motioned for Adam and Bella to sit at a table, while Chloe stood awkwardly by the door. Her eyes never met theirs, and the tension in the room was thick. Adam and Bella sat down, their expressions serious but composed. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about something bigger. A message that needed to be sent not just to Chloe, but to anyone who thought they could get away with something like this. Ethan closed the door behind him and sat across from them, his gaze focused on the couple. "I understand this situation has caused you both a great deal of distress," he began, his tone still calm, though there was a hint of unease in his voice. "I want to assure you that we take this matter very seriously. As I said, Chloe's actions will not go unnoticed. We are committed to resolving this appropriately." Chloe, who had been standing silently by the door, shifted her weight uncomfortably. It was clear she was nervous, but there was also something else. Something that Adam couldn't quite place. Was it guilt, embarrassment, or simply the realization that she might lose her job over a few reckless words? Bella didn't mince words. "We don't want just an apology," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We want to know that something will be done to prevent this from happening again. People like Chloe, who use their position to belittle others, need to be held accountable. And it's not just about this one incident. It's about the kind of environment she fosters. Not just for us, but for everyone who steps onto this plane." Adam nodded in agreement. "Exactly. If Chloe can say something like that and face no real consequences, then what kind of message does that send? That it's okay to treat people like that? Especially when they're already in a vulnerable position, stuck in the air with no way out." Ethan looked at them, his eyes betraying a flicker of concern. He seemed to understand the weight of their words. "I agree, and I'm not here to make excuses. We've already begun the process of reviewing this entire situation. We will investigate Chloe's actions, and we will ensure that the proper steps are taken. I've already reported this to the corporate office, and they'll be involved in the process moving forward." Bella's eyebrows furrowed slightly. "What kind of steps are we talking about? Will she face any real consequences?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, glancing at Chloe, who still refused to make eye contact. "We are exploring all options, including disciplinary action, but I want to be clear, this will not be taken lightly. The company is committed to fostering an inclusive and respectful environment for both our employees and our passengers. No one should feel uncomfortable or unwelcome on a flight because of their race, gender, or any other reason." Chloe shifted again, and finally she spoke in a low, shaky voice. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Her words came out almost as a whisper. "It was a mistake. I was frustrated, and I said something I shouldn't have." Bella raised an eyebrow. "A mistake? Is that all it is?" Her tone was sharp, her patience wearing thin. "You didn't just make a mistake, you targeted us. You used your position to insult and demean us. And the worst part is, you probably thought you could get away with it." Chloe's face reddened, and she looked down at the floor, as if the weight of Bella's words had hit her harder than anything she had heard before. "I'm sorry," she said again, though it lacked sincerity, almost like a reflex. But Adam wasn't ready to accept a weak apology. "Sorry doesn't fix this," he said, his voice growing more intense. "Sorry doesn't erase the way you made us feel. You embarrassed us in front of the whole plane. You made us feel less than human. It's not something that can be undone with a few words." Ethan looked between Adam and Chloe, his face tight with frustration. It was clear he understood the depth of what had happened, but the wheels of bureaucracy were slow. "I'm going to make sure that Chloe's actions are fully investigated. As for the immediate consequences, she will be removed from duty for the remainder of her shift and will conduct a formal review of her conduct during the flight. We will also ensure that you are updated on the status of this investigation." There was a long pause. The quiet of the room seemed to amplify the discomfort. Adam and Bella exchanged a glance, and though they were still upset, they knew that, at least for now, they had made their point clear. The airline was taking action. But would it be enough? "Thank you," Bella said, her voice softening just slightly. "We expect to hear back soon about the outcome of the investigation. We're not going to let this slide." Ethan nodded solemnly. "You have our word. This will be handled with the seriousness it deserves." The conversation ended with a nod from both sides. But as Adam and Bella stood up to leave, the weight of the moment lingered. They hadn't gotten everything they had hoped for, an immediate apology, a promise of permanent consequences for Chloe. But they had taken a stand. They had made it clear that this behavior was unacceptable, and now it was up to the airline to follow through on their words. As they left the office, Chloe remained behind, standing silently in her regret. Adam and Bella walked through the terminal together, knowing that no matter what came next, they had taken control of their narrative. They had refused to let silence be the final word in their story. As they walked through the terminal, the usual bustle of passengers moving to and fro felt strangely distant. Their minds were heavy with everything that had just transpired. The promise of an investigation, the quiet tension with Chloe, the uncertainty of whether the airline would truly take the necessary steps to address the incident. It all weighed on them. They didn't speak at first, each lost in their thoughts, processing the emotions from the past hour. The ordeal was far from over, but they felt a small sense of relief knowing that at least for now, their voices had been heard. Yet they both knew the bigger battle wasn't over. The consequences of Chloe's actions, whatever they might be, were still hanging in the air like an unanswered question. As they reached the baggage claim, Bella stopped and turned to Adam, a look of resolve on her face. "We have to make sure this isn't forgotten. Adam, it's not enough to just speak up once and hope that it sticks." Her voice was firm, the fire from earlier still burning beneath her calm exterior. Adam nodded, though his expression was more guarded. "I agree, but I don't want to get my hopes up. I've been through this before. Airlines and companies make all these promises, but then nothing changes. You just have to hope they don't forget about it." Once they were off the plane, Bella could understand where he was coming from. She had felt that frustration too. The sting of having been promised action before, only to watch it evaporate into nothing, was part of the reason why they had decided to take a stand in the first place. It wasn't just about what had happened on that flight. It was about challenging the system, the very idea that people could be treated poorly simply because of their race or background. But Bella wasn't ready to let go of the hope that things could be different. "We need to follow up," she said, her voice steady. "If we don't, who will? If people like us don't push for change, then no one will." They stood there for a moment, the steady hum of the baggage carousel in the background, neither of them moving, until the sound of a phone buzzing broke the silence. Adam pulled his phone from his pocket and checked the notification. It was an email from the airline, sent just minutes ago. He opened it quickly with Bella peering over his shoulder. The subject line was a simple, "Update on your recent complaint." His finger hovered over the screen for a moment before he opened the message. The email was brief but direct, offering a formal apology for the incident and reassuring them that their complaint had been received and was being taken seriously. The airline had also promised to conduct a thorough review of the situation and had outlined a few immediate actions. Chloe's removal from duty for the remainder of the day, a full investigation into her behavior, and an internal review of the airline's anti-discrimination training. "Okay," Adam said after reading it aloud. "It's something, I guess." He paused, still unsure whether it was enough to satisfy them. The airline had made the right initial steps, but Bella knew the real world was just beginning. "They're saying the right things, but we have to make sure they follow through exactly," Bella replied, her tone unwavering. "We have to keep pushing, Adam. We can't let this be just another email that gets buried in the system." As they stood there, still processing the response, a flight attendant passed by. She was a young woman, smiling as she wheeled a cart past them. She caught sight of Adam and Bella for a moment, and as she did, her expression shifted just slightly, her smile fading into something more neutral. Bella raised an eyebrow. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. The word had probably spread through the airline staff by now. People had noticed, but there was a part of her that felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just that they had been heard, it was that this wasn't something easily ignored anymore. Chloe's actions were now in the spotlight, and the airline couldn't pretend like nothing had happened, no matter how they tried to sweep it under the rug. It was there in the open, and people would remember it. "I know," Bella said, glancing at Adam. "But it feels like we're finally making a dent. If we don't stand up for ourselves, no one will." Adam nodded, his face softening. "I get it. I just don't want to get my hopes up too much." They didn't need to say more. Both of them understood the stakes. The incident wasn't just a personal attack. It was part of a larger pattern, one that countless others had experienced before them, in countless other settings. And while this one moment could have easily slipped by without a second thought, they had refused to let it. They had turned their discomfort, their anger, into action. Whether or not the airline did the right thing in the end, they had taken control of the narrative, and that was something they could be proud of. As the final pieces of their luggage appeared on the carousel, Adam and Bella grabbed their bags, ready to leave the terminal behind. But as they stepped into the busy airport, there was a sense of quiet triumph between them. They had spoken up, they had been heard, and now they would make sure that this wasn't the end of the story. The following days passed in a blur of travel and settling into their vacation, but neither Adam nor Bella could fully escape the nagging feeling that they hadn't yet received the full resolution they were looking for. Every time they checked their phones, they half expected a follow-up call or a more detailed email from the airline. But it didn't come. The hours seemed to stretch on, and despite the promises made in the airport office, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on them. Bella kept a close eye on her inbox, refreshing it every now and then, waiting for something more concrete. Adam, on the other hand, tried to put it out of his mind, immersing himself in their trip. But no matter how many beautiful sunsets they watched, or how many new places they explored, there was an unsettling feeling that the issue was still unresolved, floating just beneath the surface of their enjoyment. On the fourth day of their vacation, Bella finally couldn't wait any longer. "I'm calling them," she said as they sat on a beachside patio, the sound of crashing waves mingling with the soft buzz of tourists around them. Adam looked up from his phone, where he'd been scrolling through photos from their trip. "Are you sure? I mean, I know it's been a while, but I don't want to keep digging into it while we're supposed to be relaxing." Bella didn't look up. Her fingers were already dialing the airline's customer service number. "We can't just forget about this. We need to know where they stand." Her voice was firm, even though she was clearly frustrated. After a few minutes, the call went through, and Bella began explaining the situation once again to a different representative on the other end of the line. She spoke calmly, but her words carried weight. "I'm calling to follow up on a serious issue that we raised during a recent flight. We filed a complaint about a flight attendant's discriminatory behavior, and while we received an initial email acknowledging the situation, we haven't received any further information or updates. We need to know what actions are being taken." The representative on the other end seemed courteous, but there was a noticeable hesitation in their response. "I apologize for the delay, ma'am. I can see that the complaint was logged into our system. It appears that the investigation is still ongoing. I'll make a note that you're following up on it and escalate your request to the appropriate department." Bella's grip tightened on the phone. "How much longer do we have to wait for answers? It's been nearly a week now. This is not just about an apology. It's about accountability. You promised us an investigation." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I understand your frustration, ma'am. Please know that we're doing everything we can to resolve this. I will make sure the department in charge gets this escalated. I'll also send a follow-up email to ensure this stays at the top of the queue." Bella bit her lip, trying to keep her cool. "I understand that these things take time, but we need assurance that this won't just be swept under the rug. We need transparency, not just empty promises." The call ended shortly after, with the representative assuring her that someone from the investigation team would reach out soon. But as Bella hung up the phone, she felt a sense of growing frustration. She said she hadn't received any real answers, just more delays and vague reassurances. It was beginning to feel like they were running in circles. Adam noticed the change in her demeanor. "So what did they say?" he asked. Bella put the phone down on the table and looked at him, her brow furrowed. "Same story. They're still investigating. They said they'd escalate it, but I don't think we're any closer to getting the answers we need. It's like we're just stuck in this waiting game." Adam exhaled slowly. "I knew it was going to be like this. They make it sound like they're taking action, but they don't actually do anything." His voice carried a note of bitterness. "Maybe they think we'll just forget about it once the vacation's over." Bella wasn't ready to let it go. "No, we can't let that happen. If we keep pushing, they'll have to do something. We've already taken the first step by speaking up. Now we need to follow through. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about making sure people don't get away with treating others like that." Adam nodded, his expression softening. "I get it. I'm with you." That night, Bella took a more proactive approach. She drafted an email to the airline's corporate office, detailing the situation once more and urging them to provide a concrete timeline for the investigation. She also included the fact that they had been waiting far too long for a meaningful response. After all, promises meant little without action behind them. The next morning, Bella hit send and leaned back in her chair, her fingers still twitching with impatience. Would this email make a difference? Would it finally get them the answers they desired? Hours passed, and Bella found herself refreshing her inbox again. Then, just as the sun began to set, a new email popped up. The subject line read, "Resolution and apology regarding your recent complaint." Her heart skipped a beat. Adam glanced at her from across the table, sensing the sudden shift in her energy. Bella opened the email quickly, her eyes scanning the message for any sign of real action. It was a formal apology, as expected, but this time it came with something more substantial, a detailed account of the findings from the investigation. Chloe had been permanently removed from her duties as a flight attendant, and the airline had implemented a series of new measures aimed at preventing racial discrimination, including a revamp of its employee training programs. Furthermore, the airline offered them complimentary flight vouchers as a gesture of goodwill, acknowledging the emotional toll the incident had taken on them. For the first time in nearly a week, Bella allowed herself to exhale. It wasn't perfect, but it was a significant step forward. Adam read over her shoulder, his eyes softening as he processed the information. "Looks like they really are taking this seriously," he said quietly, a note of cautious optimism in his voice. Bella nodded slowly, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. "It's a start, but we can't stop here. We have to keep pushing, keep holding them accountable." Adam took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "We will. We've come this far. We won't let it go." And for the first time since the incident, they both felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that things could truly change, not just for them, but for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly. The next few days were a strange mix of relief and lingering tension. Adam and Bella continued their vacation, but the weight of everything that had happened hung in the back of their minds. They had finally received the confirmation that Chloe's actions would have consequences, but it wasn't as simple as just moving on. The emotional toll, the feeling of being targeted in a public space, was not something that could be easily erased by an apology or a voucher. They had gotten a response, but the underlying issue was still present, and it was far from over. Bella had spent the better part of the next morning drafting a response to the airline's latest email. She appreciated their effort to resolve the situation, but she wasn't ready to let the issue slip through the cracks. She needed to know more about the steps they were taking to ensure this wouldn't happen again, not just with Chloe, but with other employees who might hold similar prejudices or biases. "Adam, I'm sending another follow-up," she said as she typed, her eyes scanning the email draft. "We can't just assume that they're doing enough. They gave us the basics, but we need to make sure they implement something more lasting, something real." She paused, looking up at him. "It's not just about us anymore. It's about what happens next for everyone. Adam, who had been flipping through a local magazine, paused and looked over at Bella, concern in his eyes. You really think we need to keep pushing? They've already apologized. They've taken action. I mean, we got what we asked for, right? Bella shook her head, her expression thoughtful. This isn't just about getting a resolution for us. It's about setting a precedent. If we let them off the hook now, then what happens the next time something like this occurs? We're not just victims here. We're advocates. We need to make sure that every other passenger who faces something like this knows they have the right to speak up. We can't let the system fail them just because we got our apology. Adam leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. He had been hoping for a clean resolution, some finality to the issue. But Bella's words made sense. If they don't push for more change, who would? He said, nodding slowly. All right, he added. Bella smiled, a bit of determination lighting her face. I'm sending a message to the corporate office. I want them to detail the changes they're making in their employee training, and I want to know if they're planning to create a more formal reporting system for passengers who feel discriminated against. I'm also going to ask if they'll publicly address this situation, because that's where real accountability starts. Adam nodded, impressed by her resolve. I get it now. If we don't push, it won't stick. Bella sent the email and then set her phone down with a deep breath. We've done what we can. Now it's up to them to keep their word. The next couple of days were filled with anticipation as they continued their vacation. Despite their best efforts to focus on their time away, the unanswered questions lingered in the back of their minds. Would the airline truly follow through with the steps they promised? Would they be transparent about what was happening behind the scenes? Or would this whole situation just fade into the background, as so many others had before? By the end of the week, Bella's inbox finally pinged again. This time, it was a detailed reply from the airline, one that was much more thorough than anything they had received before. The email was longer, filled with specifics, and addressed the very concerns Bella had raised. The airline confirmed that they had reviewed their employee training programs, and that anti-discrimination education would now be a mandatory part of flight attendant onboarding. Additionally, they had implemented a new reporting system for passengers to submit complaints about unfair treatment. But there was one more part of the email that made both Adam and Bella pause. The airline had decided to make a public statement about the incident, acknowledging the mistake and outlining the steps they were taking to prevent future occurrences. It wasn't a full apology broadcast, but it was enough. It was a small but meaningful recognition that the issue was real, that they took it seriously, and that they were actively working to ensure it didn't happen again. Okay, Adam said, reading the email aloud as Bella sat beside him. This is more than I expected. They really seem to be following through. Bella nodded, her face softening with a sense of cautious satisfaction. They are, and that's what matters. I think this is a step in the right direction. She paused, looking at the screen thoughtfully. But we can't just stop here. This is the first time I've ever seen an airline be this transparent about something like this. If they're willing to make this kind of change, maybe it will lead to more. If we keep pushing for accountability, other companies might start to follow suit. Adam was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I guess you're right. This could be bigger than just us. Their sense of achievement was tempered by the understanding that their fight wasn't over. The road ahead would still require persistence and vigilance, but they felt a renewed sense of purpose. They hadn't just been a couple who had been insulted. They had become part of something larger by speaking out. They had helped spark a change not just within the airline, but potentially across an industry that had long ignored the small voices of its passengers. As the days of their vacation drew to a close, they began to think about returning home. The feeling of resolution was beginning to settle in, but the fire to continue advocating for justice, to keep pushing for a world where incidents like this no longer occurred, was something that would stay with them long after they boarded their flight back. They knew one thing for certain. The battle wasn't over, but they had already made a difference. And for the first time in a long while, they felt like they had actually been heard. The days that followed their vacation were a strange mix of relief and a new kind of anticipation. Adam and Bella were back home now, but the events surrounding the flight incident had left a mark on them that they couldn't easily shake off. They had fought for what they believed in, and they had seen some change, but the lingering uncertainty remained. Was this really the start of something bigger, or was it just a one-time response to a high-profitable complaint? Could they rely on the system to follow through, or had they simply been fortunate to catch the right people at the right time? Bella, who had spent the last few days reflecting on the entire experience, found herself drawn back to the thought that kept gnawing at her. What happens now? The apology from the airline, the removal of Chloe, the changes in the training programs, these were all good steps, but it wasn't enough. They couldn't stop here. What if the next person who faced a similar situation didn't have the support or platform they had? What if someone else's complaint went unheard, unnoticed? What if there were no guarantees that their voice, or anyone else's, would lead to lasting change? One evening, as Bella sat in the living room scrolling through social media, she stumbled upon a conversation thread that caught her eye. It was a post from a well-known activist organization that often covered issues related to racial injustice and inequality. The post detailed a series of incidents, most of them in public settings, like restaurants, stores, and airports, where people of color had been unfairly treated, harassed, or even threatened, simply because of their race. The thread was filled with stories from people sharing their own experiences, many of whom had been ignored or brushed off by businesses or institutions that were supposed to protect them. Her heart sank as she read through the posts, each one more disheartening than the last. The common theme was clear. People were still suffering, still being treated as less than human in public spaces, and more often than not, their complaints were dismissed or ignored altogether. The problem wasn't just isolated to one flight attendant. It was a systematic issue, one that had been entrenched for far too long. Adam, who had been sitting quietly beside her, glanced over her shoulder. "What's wrong?" he asked, sensing the shift in her mood. Bella didn't answer immediately. Her mind was racing. How many other people had gone through what they had experienced on the plane, only to have their complaints go unnoticed, their voices ignored? How many people had felt like they couldn't speak up or didn't know how to because the system was stacked against them? "This needs to change," she said finally, her voice tight with conviction. "I know we've made a difference with the airline, but this is bigger than just us. It's not just about one bad flight attendant. It's about the whole system. People of color have been treated like this for years, disrespected, ignored, or worse, and no one ever does anything about it. We need to do something about it." Adam sat up straighter, his attention now fully on her. He had always supported her advocacy, but the weight of her words hit him harder than he expected. "What do you mean? What can we do?" he asked. Bella turned to him, her eyes alight with purpose. "We need to take this further. We need to make sure that people are heard. We need to create a platform where people can safely report discrimination without fear of retaliation, and we need to put pressure on companies, not just airlines, but all businesses, must take accountability for their staff's actions." Adam's mind raced. He had never been one to shy away from standing up for what was right, but Bella's words seemed to open up a whole new world of possibility. This wasn't just about getting an apology. It was about creating a movement that would hold companies accountable, no matter how big they were, no matter how difficult it might seem. "Do you think people would listen?" he asked. Bella's eyes softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "I think people are ready to listen. They're tired of being silenced. We've seen the power of social media, how quickly people can rally behind a cause. If we keep pushing, if we keep talking about it, We can make sure this doesn't just fade into the background like all the other cases before it. We can create real, lasting change." Adam nodded slowly, the idea settling in. He could see it now, the ripple effect of people sharing their stories, standing together, demanding justice. They could start something bigger, something that would not only hold companies accountable, but also create a space for marginalized voices to be heard. Bella began to research, diving into articles and case studies about corporate accountability, activism, and how social movements had gained momentum over the years. She found stories of individuals and groups who had successfully pressured companies to change their policies, to adopt better practices to listen to the people they served. It was possible. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. Within a few days, Bella had written a proposal. It was clear, concise, and to the point. She suggested the creation of a public accountability platform where individuals could submit complaints and incidents of discrimination, harassment, or any unfair treatment they experienced in public spaces. The platform would be partnered with advocacy groups, legal teams, and the media to ensure that the stories were taken seriously and that those responsible for discrimination would be held accountable. It would offer legal resources and provide a way for victims to connect with each other and find support. She sat down with Adam, reading over the proposal. He was quiet, letting her words sink in. "I think we should go for it," he said, his voice steady. "I know it's a big step, but if we don't do something now, then when? If we don't push for real change, we're just letting it keep happening." Bella smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of hope and determination. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. She knew it would require time, effort, and resilience. But for the first time since the flight incident, she felt like she had a clear path forward, a purpose bigger than herself. This wasn't just about one flight attendant, one incident. This was about building a future where people of color and everyone who faced discrimination would have a voice that could not be ignored. It was about creating a world where no one ever had to sit in silence, hoping that their story would be heard. "I'm all in," she said, her voice steady and full of determination. Adam reached out and took her hand. "Let's do it." Bella's proposal began to take shape faster than she had expected. Once she and Adam had committed to the idea, the momentum seemed to build on its own. What had initially felt like a lofty dream was now an actionable goal. With each passing day, Bella found herself more immersed in the logistics of it all. The more she researched, the more she realized just how much work was involved. But it didn't intimidate her. Instead, it fueled her determination. Her first step was reaching out to a few organizations and activists she knew had been involved in anti-racism efforts and public advocacy. She wanted to get their perspective, ask for advice, and engage their interest in collaborating. There was something powerful about aligning with people who had walked the path of activism for years. They had experience, resources, and connections that could help amplify the work she was hoping to do. One afternoon, Bella sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, drafting an email to several advocacy groups, nonprofit organizations, and lawyers who specialized in civil rights. As she typed out her message, carefully outlining the concept of a platform that could provide a voice for people who had faced discrimination, her mind raced with the possibilities. Could this become something bigger than they had ever imagined? Could they really build a system that could hold companies accountable, no matter how large or influential? Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed. It was a reply to one of the emails she had sent earlier that morning from a well-known civil rights organization that had worked on corporate accountability for years. She clicked open the message with quick fingers, her eyes scanning the text eagerly. "Dear Bella, thank you for reaching out. Your vision for a public accountability platform is both timely and necessary. We would be happy to discuss how we might support your efforts. Let's schedule a call to talk further." Her heart skipped a beat. This was exactly the kind of response she'd hoped for. Without wasting a moment, she clicked on the link to schedule a call. The email went on to suggest a time for the following week, and Bella eagerly accepted. Later that day, she shared the news with Adam. He had been keeping busy as well, researching potential partnerships and checking into the technical aspects of building a website for the platform. He had always been the more analytical of the two, a person who loved problem solving, and now he was fully invested in the practical side of their project. He had already been looking into user interface design, considering how they could make the platform as accessible and user-friendly as possible. "You won't believe it," Bella said, practically bursting with excitement. "I got a response from one of the civil rights organizations. They want to talk about collaborating." Adam grinned, clearly pleased. "That's amazing. We're one step closer." Over the next week, Bella and Adam prepared for their first official conversation with the advocacy group. They spent hours refining their pitch, making sure they clearly articulated their vision for the platform. The goal was simple: create a space where individuals could report instances of discrimination, whether it happened in public spaces, stores, schools, or on public transportation, and ensure those reports didn't just vanish into a void. But it had to be more than just a complaints board. It needed to lead to action. They wanted the platform to serve as both a voice for marginalized people and a tool for accountability that would press companies to reform their practices. When the day of the call arrived, Bella's nerves were on edge. She had worked hard to get to this point, and now she needed to deliver. She dialed the number with Adam beside her, and after a few moments of ringing, a voice on the other end greeted them. "Hello, Bella. Adam, this is Felix from the Civil Justice Coalition. How are you?" Bella felt a rush of relief. The voice was warm and the tone was welcoming. "I'm doing well, thank you. I'm really excited to be speaking with you today." "We are too," Felix said. "We've had a chance to review your proposal and we're impressed with the thought you've put into it. The idea of creating a transparent and action-driven accountability platform is exactly the kind of initiative we've been advocating for." They spent the next hour discussing the finer points of Bella's proposal: how they would handle sensitive data, how they could build partnerships with media outlets to ensure visibility, and how they might bring in legal support for those whose cases required further action. Felix and his team had already built relationships with several media networks, and they could see the potential for a partnership with Bella's platform to give these stories the kind of exposure they needed. Felix's feedback was positive and constructive. "I think one of the key challenges is ensuring that we create a system that's both user-friendly and secure for the people who use it. We want people to feel safe sharing their stories, but we also need to protect their privacy. I'd suggest collaborating with a legal team to draft privacy policies and terms of use that will cover us absolutely," Bella agreed. "We want to make sure that everyone feels protected when they come to us. This has to be a space where people can feel heard without fear of retaliation." By the end of the call, Bella and Adam were both energized by the possibilities. It was clear that the Civil Justice Coalition was on board, and they were eager to move forward with the idea. They agreed to continue collaborating and to take the next steps towards securing funding and finalizing the design of the platform. Over the next few weeks, everything moved forward with a momentum they hadn't anticipated. Bella continued to speak with different organizations and advocates, gathering support, while Adam worked on technical aspects, including setting up a website and a database that would store the reports securely. They also worked together on the legal side, drafting documents with help from a local civil rights lawyer who offered his expertise. They started to see their idea materialize into something tangible, something that could actually make a difference. But there was still so much to be done. They had to figure out how to approach businesses directly to ensure they were held accountable when someone filed a complaint. They needed to establish guidelines for the types of complaints they would accept and how they would handle them. And perhaps most importantly, they needed to create a community, a place where people felt empowered not just to report injustices, but to support each other and stand together. As the platform's official launch date neared, Bella and Adam both felt a sense of awe at how far they had come. What had started as an emotional reaction to a personal injustice on a flight had blossomed into something much bigger. They were about to become part of something that could reshape how businesses interacted with customers, how employees were trained, and how individuals were treated. They knew it would take time, and they knew they'd face challenges ahead, but they also knew they had already made an impact. Their journey had only just begun, but they were ready to see it through. As the weeks turned into months, Bella and Adam saw their vision slowly come to life. The accountability platform began to take shape as they worked with a small team of developers to create a sleek, user-friendly website where people could easily report incidents of discrimination. The platform allowed users to submit their stories, rate the severity of the incident, and choose whether they wanted to remain anonymous or share their identity. They also included a tool that directed people to legal resources and advice based on their location and the type of discrimination they had experienced. The site wasn't just a complaints box, it was a tool for social change. Bella and Adam knew that their work had the potential to spark a ripple effect, one that could push companies to rethink how they trained their employees and how they handled complaints. The platform wasn't just about airing grievances. It was about holding businesses accountable for the actions of their staff, whether they were flight attendants, store employees, or service workers. As more and more reports came in, they began to see the patterns that existed in various industries. In 1 week alone, they received dozens of reports about discriminatory practices at major retail chains. Employees profiling customers based on their race, denying service to people based on their appearance, or making assumptions about their financial status. Bella and Adam knew that they had to take action. They couldn't just collect complaints. They needed to engage with the companies involved, demand answers, and push for tangible changes. Their first big test came when a major retailer was named in several reports for its discriminatory practices. Bella and Adam, armed with data and a growing sense of purpose, reached out to the company's customer service department. What followed wasn't what they had hoped for. The company's response was dismissive, and they were reluctant to take accountability for their actions. They offered generic apologies but made no real promises to implement change. The response only strengthened Bella and Adam's resolve. They knew they couldn't let this go unnoticed. With the help of their legal advisors, they began drafting a public petition that would call on the company to address the issues raised by the reports. They reached out to the media, and within days the story was picked up by local news outlets. Their platform had gone from a small idea to a powerful tool for accountability. People who had felt silenced began to see the impact of speaking out. The tide was shifting. By the time the retailer responded, they had been bombarded with public pressure from both the media and thousands of people who had signed the petition. The company issued a formal apology, promising to retrain its staff, implement a more transparent reporting system, and hold employees accountable for any future incidents of discrimination. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a significant victory. Bella and Adam felt the weight of their efforts starting to pay off. This moment marked a turning point. What had started as a response to one flight attendant's actions had grown into a larger movement, one that demanded systemic change. It wasn't just about the incident with Chloe anymore. It was about changing how people were treated in everyday spaces, from stores to airports to offices. It was about creating a future where no one would have to endure the kind of disrespect that Adam and Bella had faced. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were still setbacks, and not every company was as responsive as the retailer. Some businesses refused to take responsibility, while others tried to undermine the platform's legitimacy. Bella and Adam had to learn how to navigate these challenges with patience and persistence. They understood that real change took time and required a mix of public pressure, legal action, and, most importantly, the collective voices of those who had been silenced for too long. Over time, their platform grew into a movement. More stories were shared, more companies were held accountable, and more people came together to demand a more just and respectful society. Bella and Adam had created a space where people could not only report incidents of discrimination, but also feel supported in their fight for justice. The platform became a network connecting victims of discrimination with resources, lawyers, and advocacy groups that could help them pursue their cases. It was becoming a lifeline for those who had felt powerless. In some cases, it helped people win legal battles they never thought possible. It wasn't just the success of the platform that kept Bella and Adam going. It was the people they met along the way. Every email, every phone call, every message of gratitude reinforced the impact they were having. They saw how their work was giving people a sense of agency, a belief that their voices mattered. Adam and Bella didn't just feel like they were making a difference. They were part of something much larger than themselves, a movement that was pushing for long overdue change in every corner of society. As the months passed, the platform continued to grow, and the impact of their work was undeniable. Adam and Bella received invitations to speak at conferences, participate in panels, and contribute to articles about corporate accountability and the fight against racial discrimination. They were no longer just the couple who had been insulted on a plane. They were now recognized advocates, voices that others turned to for guidance and support. But for all their success, there was always that nagging feeling, a reminder of how far they still had to go. The issues of racism and discrimination weren't going to be solved overnight, and the fight for justice was far from over. Adam and Bella knew that they had to keep pushing, keep speaking out, and keep holding people accountable. The platform was growing, but so were the challenges. As more people came forward with their stories, they faced more resistance from institutions that had long profited from inequality. Despite the pushback, Adam and Bella remained resolute. They had created something that was working. They had ignited a movement that was bigger than any single issue or moment in time. They had shown the world that when people come together, when they speak up and demand change, they can move mountains. One evening, as they sat together in their living room looking out at the city skyline, Bella turned to Adam. "I think we've done it. We've made a real impact and we're just getting started." Adam smiled, his eyes meeting hers. "You know, I never would have thought that something so small, a flight, an insult, a single moment, could turn into all of this." Bella nodded, her thoughts turning to the countless people they had helped, and to the future that was still unfolding before them. It's amazing what can happen when you refuse to let something go, when you refuse to stay silent. We've learned that the smallest action can spark the biggest change. They sat in silence for a while, the quiet hum of the city filling the space between them. Adam knew that the journey ahead would still be long and that the fight for justice would continue, but they also knew that they had started something powerful, something that couldn't be stopped. They had fought for their voice, for their dignity, and in doing so, they had given others the tools to fight for theirs. They had made a difference not just in their own lives, but in the lives of so many others, and for the first time since that fateful flight, they could finally say without hesitation that they had changed the world. There is one section left. The story is nearing its conclusion, and the final section will wrap up the journey of Bella and Adam, reflecting on their impact and the future of their movement. Would you like me to continue and complete the last section? The final chapter of Bella and Adam's journey unfolded in a way neither of them could have fully anticipated. Months had passed since the first steps of their platform, and while the road had been long, they both felt a profound sense of accomplishment. What had started as a personal grievance, a moment of injustice on a flight, had blossomed into a full-fledged movement with far-reaching consequences. They had created a space where people could speak their truth, where businesses were held accountable, and where countless individuals had found the courage to stand up for themselves. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the ripple effect they had started, the wave of change that was slowly but surely sweeping across industries. They had sparked a conversation that was no longer confined to the boardrooms of corporate America, but was echoing in every corner of society. from social media platforms to community meetings, from corporate policy changes to public protests. The demand for accountability was louder than ever before. One chilly evening, as Bella sat on their living room couch scrolling through messages from users of the platform, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. Adam was sitting beside her, sipping his coffee as they talked through some of the latest updates on the platform. Their phones buzzed with notifications. More stories coming in, more support from organizations, more news outlets interested in covering their work. The notifications had become a regular part of their lives, but today, something felt different. The weight of it all, the work, the progress, the support, was beginning to sink in. "You know, Adam, I keep thinking about how far we've come," Bella said, her voice tinged with both pride and disbelief. "Just a year ago, I couldn't have imagined we'd be where we are now." Adam nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "It's been a wild ride, but I think we both knew from the start that this wasn't just about one flight incident. It was bigger than that." Bella's gaze lingered on her phone for a moment, her fingers still hovering over the screen. "It really is. Every time I read one of these stories, people thanking us for giving them a platform, people sharing their experiences and finding support, it just hits me how many people need this kind of space. It's not just about the companies. It's about the people who feel like no one's ever listening to them." They were interrupted by a soft ping. Bella glanced at her phone, where she saw a message from Michael at the Civil Justice Coalition. It was brief, but it made her heart race. "I have something to share. Check out the news. You've made the front page." "Wait, what?" Bella said, her voice rising in surprise. She quickly opened the link Michael had sent her. Her eyes widened as she read the headline. "Nationwide accountability platform gains momentum. Corporations are now listening." The article detailed how their platform had not only forced several companies to address their discriminatory practices, but it had also sparked a larger conversation about systemic racism in corporate America. It highlighted several high-profile incidents, including the retailer they had targeted months ago, and how the company had been forced to take real steps toward reform. "Sam, look at this," she said, handing him the phone. His eyes scanned the article, and his expression softened with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I can't believe it. We're really making a difference." Bella smiled, but it wasn't a smile of surprise. It was a smile of affirmation. This was what they had worked for. This was the result of their determination, their refusal to let go of something that had started as a personal injustice, but had grown into a cause much larger than themselves. The article wasn't just about their platform. It was about how people, organizations, and entire industries were starting to take accountability for their actions. It was a testament to the power of collective action, to the idea that even the smallest voice could create change if it was amplified enough. Adam set the phone down and looked at Bella, his eyes reflecting the same pride she felt. "We didn't just create a platform, Bella. We helped build a movement. We gave people a voice, and we made sure they were heard." Bella nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. They had started with a single spark, and now they had ignited a fire that was spreading across the nation. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done. There would always be more stories to tell, more companies to hold accountable, and more injustices to address. The fight for equality and justice would never be over. But Bella and Adam had learned something invaluable along the way. They had learned that no matter how small the action, no matter how impossible the goal seemed, change was possible. And as they sat together side by side, looking at the future ahead of them, they knew they were ready to continue the fight. They knew that their voices, along with the voices of so many others, had the power to shape the future. For the first time in their lives, Bella and Adam truly believed that one moment, One action, one decision could change the world. And they were just getting started. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Eric Dees. The lesson from this story is the power of speaking up and fighting for justice. Adam and Bella didn't let an unjust incident pass without taking action. They used their voices to create change, not only in their own case, but also to help others facing similar situations. The story emphasizes the importance of perseverance and continually pushing for change, even in the face of delays and disappointment. It also shows that every small action, whether it's a criticism or a demand for justice, can make a significant difference. From a personal situation, they inspired a larger movement, expanding their influence and creating a safe space for those facing discrimination. This story encourages everyone never to stay silent in the face of injustice, and to always believe in the power to make change, even with small steps at first. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more captivating and unforgettable stories. Stay tuned for more exciting content coming your way. See you in the next one.